How do you then, given just its inherent distributed nature, its geographically distributed nature, especially Alexis, as when you are looking in the long-term future and looking to help build your own investments, how do you find, or how do you push towards that universal standard, or not universal, but at least sort of shaking out the standards that Neha mentioned, like everything is happening in different pockets, and it seems like you really do need to find some sort of common ground. So how do you look for that common ground when you're making your investments?
Well, first and foremost, we try to inform ourselves by traveling, spending time in these communities, also reading all the things that MIT Media Lab publishes and talks about, because it's incredibly helpful. And also just knowing that we don't ultimately have a crystal ball. And as an early stage investor, we'd like to believe that we do. But a bunch of investors sitting around a table in San Francisco are never going to be able to tell you what the future is. It's founders, it's the people who are obsessing over these problems who give us the insight. We make investments, and every now and then we get right. But it's not something that we have an easy answer to.
Well, and in terms of asking about the future, since Alex, what do you? So if we're in the late 70s, early 80s, what does this look like in 25 years?
Yeah, great question. I mean, the thing about comparing it to the internet is there's an assumption baked in that it's going to evolve the way the internet did, and it's not really clear that that's going to happen at all. We're in a completely different world right now, and this is money. Like, people are making serious amounts of money with this, and the internet kind of got to develop in secret a little bit. It was in government research labs. It was at universities. People weren't really paying attention in the early days. They were like, okay, there's that nerdy email thing all the scientists are doing, but that's not really going to affect us. Totally different story here. One thing that we're actually really concerned about is how do we take the lessons we've learned from the internet and how do we apply them to this space? What we've seen happen with our data, with information, sort of the way things got away from us, can we learn from that, and can we apply it to this space and make something that's a little bit more user-focused, user agency-focused, user control-focused?
What would be the biggest mistake to repeat? What would be the thing that you worry the most about happening again in this space that happened in the internet, if that makes sense?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think probably not paying attention to the massive sort of market players that we're developing, right? Not noticing that there were these giant sort of pots of user data that were being formed and were being harvested, and we weren't really thinking about how important that was. And so I think really approaching this technology from the point of view of we need to actively work to counteract the centralizing forces and to keep it distributed and to keep users in control.
And as Coinbase's seed investor, how do you view that same sort of problem?
I think Brian and the Coinbase team would agree that more competition is always just better, period. That obviously has been a very good seed investment for us. But I do agree, there are lessons to be learned. I do think the nature of software and startups is still one of the best antidotes. I know Jeff was here earlier. We have an entire thesis that is just built on anti-Amazon, because software companies are the only ones capable of building the technology to help many of the Fortune 1000 compete with Amazon, and so those are their clients. And we've started to see this flywheel spin up, and I think it's actually going to be one of the best sort of defenses to kind of keep Amazon in check. And to your point around privacy, I mean, I'm starting to see, it's probably no coincidence that I'm seeing more and more pitches now for decentralized social networks. And look, I think at the end of the day, what is going to get a user, I do believe in privacy tech as becoming a bigger trend now as a result of a lot of these breaches and a lot of the more awareness. But look, that's not what's going to get you to switch your social network, right? It needs to have better, there needs to be something fundamentally better about the UI, the UX, or the cat photos, or whatever it is. And so it's bigger than just saying, oh, look, it's decentralized, you have ownership. There has to be some greater push or pull. But I think we're getting close now. And I actually think this is another area that we're going to see something surprise us in the next couple of years.
Gotcha. And then, Neha, just one last question for you. In terms of, I've heard Alexis say a lot about the next year or two in terms of like big innovations. Do you think that's a realistic time frame to think about these things, or are we just on a much longer trajectory in terms of enough pieces coming together?
I think when it comes to really delivering on a lot of the promises that have been made, it's a pretty long trajectory. That said, things are moving so much faster than I ever thought that they could. And I think people are all around the world, like, beating their heads against all of these problems, building things, talking to each other, getting really excited. And so I'm sure that, the one thing I know is that in 1 year, this space will look completely different in a way that we couldn't even predict.
Can I ask one question?
Yeah, absolutely.
What one book or research paper would you recommend we all read?
Oh man,
Wired
everyone asks
magazine.
this. Yeah. Yeah.
You're like,
Oh, no,
Here we go.
I have an answer.
great.
The Satoshi White Paper. All of you should read the
Required
Satoshi
reading.
White Paper. It's actually very good, very approachable. Highly recommend it.
And on that note, thank you guys so much for being with us. Thank you all.
Thank you.